I get asked a lot, how long have you been doing this? Filmmaking. Depending on the context of the conversation, I usually go with something like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, maybe. While this isn't necessarily untrue, it's sort of only like the tip of the iceberg. The truth is, I guess, I first began this journey of capturing video and publishing here on YouTube over 15 years ago. Every once in a while, I revisit that deeply archived chapter of my life. I'm talking literally pre-puberty, 10-year-old Ryan.
Hey, this is Ryan with the YouTube username of Ryan.
Holy jeez.
I'm gonna be syncing this up in Final Cut Pro 7.
What the f is that?
Literally, over 15 years of footage, tens of thousands of folders, like almost 60 terabytes of data. What does someone do with all of that footage? When it comes to filmmaking and photography, no matter what camera you choose, no matter what lens you use, the end result is data. So what blows my mind is, why is it that so many of us could frankly care less about how and where that data ends up living? From the time my youngest self picked up a camera, my workflow kind of looked something like this. I would shoot something, take that memory card, plug it into my computer, dump the files into a random folder, and later editing the footage, export that video, call it a day. And that original media would likely stay right where it was, repeat the process, another folder. Eventually, you run out of space on the hard drive, fast forward a couple of years, and you end up with terabytes and scattered hard drives of files, random names for projects, difficult to sift through or find. So what is the right way to solve this problem for us as creatives? Well, after endless trial and error over upwards of a decade, I think I can finally say that I have found my ideal solution: network attached storage. Well, hey, before you tune out, I'm not here to argue the fact that the term NAS can seem intimidating or frankly overkill. I mean, I've been one of those people for a long time. So to keep things simple, today I want to walk you guys through my entire process of exactly how I set up my NAS, how tedious and complicated it is, how it fits into my workflow, and a couple of kind of unexpected things that have completely transformed my entire approach to data storage, and I think will change yours. Okay, why would you want your storage attached to a network? It seems a little overly complicated, especially if you're the only one working with those files. Like, why not just a big external hard drive or two? The huge point I think so many people are mistaken about is that it can work just as simple as an external hard drive, plug and play, but it can also do so much more. This is the Synology DS1821 Plus. It's an 8-bay NAS with all of the latest features and performance, of course, and for the first time in my 15 years of creating videos, I think I can finally say I have found the tool for the job. Look, I'm honestly really happy to say that this video is sponsored by Synology. Full transparency, had they not reached out to me about partnering up, this was going to be my first purchase of 2024. I have spent so much time and money trying basically every single option, endless external hard drives, different RAID enclosures, you name it. So to break things down, I want to cover a few points of criteria for what I need as a full-time cinematographer and video editor from a storage solution. So how does this thing work? Well, if you're familiar with how a NAS works, feel free to jump ahead just a bit. At its core, what we have is just a big hard drive enclosure with individual bays that we can install our own standard SATA hard drives that combine together to reach your desired storage capacity. I currently have 8 12 terabyte drives from Synology, giving me a total capacity of around 76 terabytes in a RAID 5 configuration. If you're unfamiliar with how a RAID works, I know it's kind of a lot, but the real key benefit to me is that a RAID configuration can grow with you over time. If you need more storage, instead of having to get a completely separate external drive, you can simply add another drive to that storage pool. So for connectivity, instead of connecting this with a normal USB, like USB-C or something like that, you actually use a standard Ethernet cable to connect directly from your NAS to your computer or workstation. Yeah, that's it. Like realistically, if all you need is direct local access to your files, this will do it. You can just simply configure this on your computer with the Synology Assistant, and from there you will be able to connect to this just like you would a normal external hard drive. So instead of having piles of individual hard drives that, for one, it's difficult to keep organized, and for two, all of the individual drives on their own, those ports wear out over time, cables, I can keep all of my data contained in one singular place that's not only faster, but also more reliable. If how all of this works isn't making sense to you, let me clarify just a little bit further. We have the NAS itself. This is essentially going to live in our office just like any other hard drive. Yeah, the NAS itself runs to the Wi-Fi node back there, the TP-Link Deco. This is, of course, the Alex cabinet from IKEA, just something simple. We drilled some holes in the side and added these little grommets for one, airflow, but also to run our cabling into the side. I have this small little piece of foam that's gonna help with a little bit of the vibration inside of the cabinet. If I need video editing capable read and write speeds, I'm gonna connect to this with the 10 gigabit network card via this Ethernet cable. That plugs into the back of the NAS. From there, we have a 10 gigabit Ethernet to Thunderbolt adapter, so I can then take and plug this straight into my MacBook Pro. Everything runs over. I have the 10 gigabit Ethernet adapter just kind of hung under there. Cable management, it's not the prettiest. I'm gonna clean it up, but it's functional for now. Of course, this setup and being here at my desk in my office, it's really not performing any differently than how a typical external hard drive or even an SSD would perform. This thing has to stay here. It's got to live here. It can't travel with it. It could, but that'd be pretty stupid. What makes these setups different is that if we plug this into our home network, this goes from just a big external hard drive that would sit on your desk to literally your own personal cloud with all of your files accessible to you and whoever else you want from anywhere in the world. Let me ask you this. Are you currently paying for some form of online cloud storage? I think I can speak for just about everybody when I say that paying for all of these subscriptions, it adds up so unbelievably fast. So what if you could just eliminate that and just have it internally, like own it, just as accessible to you or anyone else as any other cloud platform? What becomes really interesting about having this NAS wired here into my office, if I'm working somewhere else inside of my home, let's say out on my couch, I'm often editing on my laptop, I can connect to the NAS via my home network, directly accessible in my Mac Finder as a hard drive. Now, granted, the read and write speeds that I'm gonna get from this is basically gonna be limited to my Wi-Fi network speed. Here in my home, I have pretty impressive Wi-Fi speeds, around 300 to 400 megabits per second. That translates to about 25 to even 40 megabytes per second using the NAS over Wi-Fi. More than usable for most things. If I'm just quickly pulling a clip, copy it to my SSD, and I'm good to go. Think about having every little bit of your data, all of your footage accessible at all times without having to think about uploading it to the cloud for access. Like it is the cloud. Like it's where you store your footage, but it's a cloud. There's certain qualities to that I don't think people can fully understand until you try it in your own workflow. The final piece for me to consider is, of course, speed. If you've done any amount of video editing, then you're probably familiar that speed of the hard drive you're using is pretty important. SSDs like these are, of course, the go-to. When it comes to a NAS, speed will vary depending on what RAID or drive configuration you choose to use. But read and write speeds can be even a little bit more complex to understand because we are using an Ethernet cable opposed to something like a USB-C cable. A standard Ethernet port on most computers is generally a 1 gigabit connection. The maximum speed translates to around 125 megabytes per second. Not fast enough if we're talking about high-end video editing. This is where 10 gig Ethernet comes into play. I'll admit, it's It's kind of one of the intimidating terms when you start researching and learning about a NAS setup, but just as it sounds, 10 gig, it's roughly 10 times the bandwidth of a 1 gig connection. It's really not as complicated as it seems though. In the 1821, I have the optional Synology 10 gig card installed. And from there, we can still use standard Ethernet cable. It just needs to be Cat 6. I can then just simply connect that to my MacBook with a 10 gig Ethernet to Thunderbolt adapter. Some newer and higher end computers will actually have a 10 gig Ethernet port built in. So you're probably curious, how fast is this NAS? Well, with these 8 12 terabyte drives, I'm getting read and write speeds of around 500 megabytes per second. Look, I'm not gonna deny that this is kind of a lot to understand. It's a lot of things to think about that effectively just give you a hard drive to use to store your media. But if we strip all of the technical stuff away, what this setup allows us to do is eliminate multiple steps out of the media offloading workflow. So real world example here, what my workflow used to look like: shoot some stuff, take the memory cards, import that footage onto an SSD for editing. From there, that would then get backed up to a hard drive, something like this. And then more often than not, if I'm working with a collaborator or sending the project to a client, uploading all of that to the cloud. Effectively 3 manual steps just to deal with footage on an everyday project for me. With this setup, we can basically do all of that in one step. I take the footage from my SD cards, dump them directly onto the NAS, where it will be fast enough to edit from if I'm here in my office, and simultaneously that will be backed up to one of my older big hard drives that I have tons of laying around. On the DS1821, you'll notice there are USB ports. Within Synology's DSM software, I can connect this and via hyper backup, create automated backups. And it will instantly be available on the cloud because it is the cloud. Like it's where you dump your footage, it's where you edit from. And once it's there, it's available to you, it's available to anybody remotely, wherever you're at. Now, I know we haven't really covered backups and how it works with the Synology system. My workflow is to effectively have one of these connected and actively be backing up my 2024 projects folder until it's full. I can then take this, store it in a safe location, and that's good to go. Now, I fully realize this is not a proper 3-2-1 backup system, and it's definitely not the safest, but I think for my cases, it's more than effective. If you need a proper off-site backup or cloud backup for your NAS, there are options available. Synology has one. But with all that, the cost, like the financial impact and investment of this entire system, I won't argue that if we're talking about sheer capacity, you can definitely get a lot more for your money by just using these big external hard drives or these smaller drives when you need them. But what that's gonna leave you with is, well, a big box of these, and you're more than likely still going to be paying monthly for cloud storage if you're sending your projects around or backing it up. This setup, this DS1821 with all 8 drives in it, yeah, it's not cheap. That said, Synology does have a variety of different NAS models that can suit you depending on what budget you need. And you can fill those hard drive bays with whatever makes the most sense for you, your budget, your workflow. I don't have the exact math off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure for a lot of people, paying for cloud storage over a 5-year span would be more than close to, if not paying off, investing into a NAS setup for yourself. I will, of course, have everything I used in my system linked down in the description. Synology, thank you for supporting my data problem and sponsoring this video. That's all I have for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.